During the time I was imprisoned by the maid, I have been exercising to improve my physical fitness. At this moment, the maid brought me food and a bathtub for bathing. Without hesitation, I ran to take a shower. However, the various behaviors of the maid still make me feel uncomfortable. Suddenly, because I ate the food given by the maid, I lost consciousness once again. After waking up, I felt very angry, but the maid was willing to fulfill my small wish.
198, 199, the sound of counting echoed in the room. In this narrow and dim room, Moen is doing push-up. Sweat dripped from his body onto the floor. Because Anne didn't give him any clothes, he could only casually wrap the white sheet around his waist and make a simple piece of clothing. For the convenience of doing push-up, he also tied up his hair. 200. Moen lifted his head and straightened his hand to support himself. He held this position for a short rest. He has already shed a lot of sweat on both his face and body. After a period of exercise, it seems that the muscles in his arms have increased significantly. After a while, Moen felt very tired in his body. After finishing his physical exercise, he lay down very casually on the ground. He closed his eyes and kept panting. At this moment, he opened one eye and raised his left hand. He looked at his left hand, panting and speaking. Fortunately, this body is still in good condition. The cultivation space of Black Book can only improve skills, and it is also easy to damage the brain. To increase physical strength, I can only use this primitive method, and Cilicia is like this. Anne is like this. Damn it, from now on, I must never be oppressed by someone again. I want to be up there. Moen closed his eyes and clenched his fist tightly, as if he had made a major decision. Tears of unwillingness flowed from his eyes. He needs to rely on improving his physical fitness to escape his fate of being ravaged by Anne. I feel relieved seeing the young master so spirited. At this moment, Moen heard a familiar voice coming from outside the door. Immediately after, the sound of the key turning came from the iron gate. Then, with a slight noise, the iron door was slowly opened by someone. He sat up from the ground. He turned his head and curiously looked towards the direction of the iron gate. He said somewhat surprised, "Anne, you're back." The person who walked into the room was Anne. She stood at the door of the room with a smile on her face. There are some items floating on both sides of her. She activated her magic and easily brought metal plates, utensils, and iron bathtubs into the room. Because she saw Moen again, her mood was very happy. She said to him, "Yes, the work has been completed. What you just said, young master, sounds exactly like a wife greeting her hard-working husband coming home. That's really cute." Before entering the room, Anne seemed to have heard what Moen had said. She found Moen's words very interesting, so she giggled gently a few times. She closed her eyes and raised her hand. She touched her lips with her fingers, as if feeling very happy at this moment. "I brought dinner, medicinal soup, and a bathtub for the young master to take a shower. I have already adjusted the water temperature, which is what the young master likes." The pink magical energy envelops the dining plate and bathtub. Under Anne's control, they were all gently placed on the ground. The hot water in the bathtub still emits a faint steam, and it doesn't seem too hot. Seeing the bathtub placed in the room, Moen smiled happily. "Oh, that would be great. Speaking of which, I haven't taken a shower for 2 days either." At this moment, Anne suddenly said to Moen, "Yes, so, young master, do you want to take a shower first, or eat me first?" Anne shyly turned her head to one side, her face tinged with a slight blush. Her eyes were filled with tenderness and seduction. She raised one hand and unbuttoned the maid's uniform. The white, twin peaks, and close-fitting clothing are slightly exposed. She gently twisted her body, and the twin peaks also swayed gently with her movements. Then, she hooked a part of her close-fitting clothing with her hand and touched her, Twin Peaks, again, as if inviting Moen to look towards her. Take a shower. Moen didn't seem to hear the last words Anne said. Because he hasn't taken a shower for too long, all he has in his mind now is the idea of wanting to take a shower. After answering Anne's words, Moen pulled off the blanket around his waist and quickly rushed towards the bathtub. He made a strong jump with both feet and jumped straight into the bathtub. Seeing Moen's reaction, Anne felt somewhat speechless. Her charm seems to be of no use to Moen at the moment. She whispered, "Okay, okay." Moen removed his hair tie and washed his hair. Since he didn't dry his hair, the water on his head silently dripped into the bathtub. However, he seemed somewhat helpless in the current situation. He closed his eyes and whispered, "Anne." Upon hearing Moen calling her, Anne asked in a calm tone, "What's wrong, young master? Is the water temperature not suitable?" Moen felt a bit speechless when Anne didn't understand his question. He continued to speak to her. "It's not a problem with the water temperature, it's just that I'm not a child. I can take a shower myself." Moen leaned nervously against the bathtub. His body was covered with bath gel and foam. Anne stood behind him and gently grabbed his arm. She applied shower gel to him while using one hand to rub his body. She had a smile on her face, as if she didn't think that it was a hard job. She felt a little disappointed when she heard what Moen said. "Yourself? Has the young master already despised me after only one night?" Anne leaned into Moen's ear and whispered these words softly. Her warm breath exhaled in his ear, allowing him to feel her warmth. She reached out her hands covered with foam and gently touched Moen's chest. She rubbed her hand against his body again and again, seemingly dissatisfied with what he had just said. Moen felt Anne's hand wandering around his body. He had goosebumps all over his body. He looked up, his face tinged with a faint blush. He snorted softly. No, I just..." Before Moen could finish speaking, Anne took her hand away from Moen and put it in the bathtub. She continued to caress Moen's body while saying to him, "It's good if there's nothing. The young master is now something that belongs only to me. It is my duty as a guardian to clean every inch of the young master's body." At this moment, she said with some surprise, "Oh. Do you want to? It's okay. In my place, young master doesn't need to suppress yourself. I'm always been here." Anne stuck out her tongue and gently licked Moen's ear. She reached out her hand and placed it on his chin, gently lifting it up. At this moment, due to Anne's movements, the blush on Moen's cheeks became increasingly red. He tried to explain to Anne, "No, I don't have that idea. This is a normal reaction for a man." He closed his eyes tightly and tried to endure the physiological reactions of his body. "Bro, hold on. Don't lose to this crazy woman." Seeing Moen's reaction, Anne found it very interesting. While Moen was still trying to endure, she took her hand out of the water. "Fine, I won't tease you." Then, she squatted down, picked up the silver plate that was lying on the ground, and uncovered the lid placed on it. There is meat of different colors on the plate. She is holding a plate in her left hand and a tableware in her right hand. She walked towards Moen with a smile on her face and said to him, "Since the young master wants to take a shower by himself, let me feed you." Moen noticed that Anne wouldn't do anything to him for the time being, so he breathed a sigh of relief. He was very happy to hear that he could eat. All right. Let's eat." Anne picked up a brown piece of meat with a fork and placed his other hand under the fork to prevent the sauce from dripping onto Moen. She reached out her fork to Moen's mouth. "Young master, say, ah." Moen obediently opened his mouth and ate the meat. This is so delicious." Suddenly, Moen showed a very surprised expression. This piece of meat is so delicious that it makes him open his eyes wide. His eyes sparkled because of this piece of meat. He excitedly took his hand out of the water. He snatched the plate and fork from Anne's hand. Perhaps because he was hungry, he quickly used a fork to pick up one piece of meat after another and put it in his mouth. Because his eating movements were a bit fast, some water in the bathtub even splashed onto the plates. However, he doesn't care so much anymore. He seems to have tasted such delicious meat for the first time. He evaluated the meat while eating. I haven't had such delicious beef before when my father and mother were still at home. It is smooth and chewy, and the most important thing is that it's not only tender but it doesn't have that very tough tendon. Anne couldn't help but feel happy as she watched Moen enjoying the delicious food. She turned her head and explained to him. "Young master, you're really amazing. You know it is beef so quickly. In fact, the young master used to often eat these ingredients, but I'm worried that they don't suit your taste, so I usually use them to make soup." Moen nodded at Anne's words. He chewed the meat in his mouth and felt the pleasure it brought him. Noticing that the corners of Moen's mouth were stained with sauce, Anne took out a handkerchief and helped him wipe his mouth. Moen is very curious about this delicious meat. He turned his head and asked Anne, "What part of the cow is this delicious beef from? Is it the tenderloin or the neck?" "It's an ox genital." At this moment, Anne calmly revealed the location of the meat. Ox genital. Upon hearing Anne's words, Moen was greatly shocked. He was immediately stunned. He stared blankly ahead with his mouth wide open. He couldn't believe that such delicious meat actually came from this part of the cow. He accidentally sprayed out a little minced meat from his mouth. Anne doesn't seem to care about Moen's reaction. She closed her eyes and continued to explain to him. "It's the Mogratha giant bull. I heard that their abilities in that area are particularly strong. When male giant cows go into heat and cannot find a mate, many tree holes will appear near their habitat after one night, so they are also known as the tree-boring divine bull." At this moment, after listening to Anne's explanation, Moen felt that he had completely petrified himself. He cannot accept this truth at all. Due to his excessive shock, he did not hold the fork firmly. His fork fell into the bathtub. He could imagine a giant bull looking ahead with very terrifying eyes. It also emits a strong golden light from a certain part of its body. He felt very nauseous. He can no longer tolerate the meat he eats being from this part of the cow. He grabbed the edge of the bathtub with both hands and turned his head down, vomiting violently on the ground. Anne is very calm about this situation. She picked up the nearby trash can to catch his vomit. She continued speaking to him. In addition, there are tiger whips, bull whips, goblin whips, troll whips, and so on. If it wasn't for the fact that dragons were relatively rare within the Empire, dragon whip would actually be excellent. Moen, who had just vomited, didn't want to hear the meat Anne was talking about for a moment. He kept coughing. He hasn't recovered from the vomiting process yet. He spoke intermittently. "Stop, stop. So, why are you doing this? Is this something that humans can eat?" Anne did not hide anything from Moen. She said to him very directly, "Of course. Actually, I have been secretly adding these things to your diet for a long time. However, considering that at that time, that's enough. I can't bear it anymore." Before Anne could finish speaking, Moen couldn't suppress his anger. He clenched his hands into fists and suddenly stood up from the bathtub. His face showed a very angry expression. He completely forgot that he was still taking a shower and not wearing clothes. However, he was so overcome with anger that he no longer wanted to care about such details. "You imprisoned me in such a dark place and made me eat this kind of thing." Anne squatted down and held her face with both hands. She lifted her head and calmly watched as Moen got angry with her. She was like a patient audience silently listening to him speak. Moen reached out his hand and angrily pointed at Anne. He can no longer tolerate anything she did to him just now. He cursed loudly. "Damn it! Ox genital, is a bullwhip something that humans can eat? Let me tell you, if you don't let me out again, I'll... Before he could finish speaking, Moen suddenly felt his body unusually tired. His eyes were about to close, as if he was about to fall asleep. Anne noticed Moen's physical abnormality, but she did not immediately take emergency measures. She crouched beside him and silently watched him as if she knew he would experience such symptoms. She muttered to herself, "Sure enough, just one drop is enough." At this point, Moen had already lost consciousness. He gradually couldn't maintain his body balance. He gently fell forward, ready to fall from the bathtub to the ground. Upon seeing this situation, Anne immediately stepped forward and hugged him. "You're right to be mad, young master. I completely understand how painful it is to lose your freedom. However, if giving you that freedom means losing you forever, I could never allow that. So, sleep well, young master. Leave everything to me." Anne whispered these words in Moen's ear. She gave a satisfied smile. She approached Moen and pressed her face tightly against his. She raised a hand and repeatedly stroked his head, as if soothing a sleeping person. The night is still long. Outside the Duke's mansion, the moon has slowly risen into the sky. It silently gazed at this large mansion. However, what it didn't know was that something was about to happen in a room of the Duke's mansion. Time seems to have passed for a long time. At this point, Moen had already awakened from his coma. He slowly opened his eyes and breathed lightly. He could still feel a slight discomfort in his head and body. He was lying in bed, with his body covered in a blanket. This may be something Anne helped him with. Anne picked up the clothes she threw on the ground last night and put them on one by one. The black stockings outlined her slender legs. Noticing that Moen had already woken up, Anne, who was wearing close-fitting clothes, turned his head to look at him. "Young master, you're awake. Yesterday, it was too intense. I'm worried that the young master's body would be too tired, so today I only did it twice," Anne explained to Moen while putting on the maid's uniform and buttoning it up. After putting on a complete set of clothes, Anne patted her maid's uniform with her hand and brushed off the dust stuck on it. Then, she straightened the folds of the clothes. After confirming that the clothes were fine, she walked over to the bed and leaned slightly down to ask Moen, "Does the young master feel any discomfort?" Moen pursed her lips and turned her head to one side. He neither wants to see nor talk to Anne. He is still angry about what Anne did to him. Anne didn't feel angry when she saw Moen's reaction. She approached him and patiently continued to ask, "Is the young master still angry with me?" However, Moen still maintained this posture and did not intend to speak face to face with Anne. He furrowed his brow slightly and showed an unhappy expression. Seeing that Moen still didn't choose to forgive her, Anna pondered for a moment. Then, she came up with an idea. "Considering that the young master has been very obedient these past few days, I can fulfill a small request from the young master. It's that okay?" Upon hearing Anne's words, Moen slowly turned his head to look at her. He whispered with a puzzled expression, "A small request?" Moen directly expressed his thoughts. "I want freedom." "That's not possible. I need clothes." "No way. This is not acceptable, that is not acceptable. How small are the small requirements you mentioned?" Moen is getting impatient with Anne. He doesn't understand what kind of demands she can fulfill. Anne lifted her hand and touched her lips with her fingers. She looked up at the ceiling and made a cute, thoughtful gesture. Let me think. Probably to the extent that you can decide what to have for lunch and dinner every day." Moen seemed to have suddenly thought of something. His eyes widened slightly.